Hello, good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Arturo Blancas, and I am Director General of the Statistics Economics in Mexico, in INEGI, the National Office, Statistical Office. We are now begin with the agenda, with the first point, that is the message of the my boss, the Dr. Graciela Marquez Colín, President of INEGI. If you can move the video, please. You can hear me? Okay. Go ahead, please.
Good morning or good afternoon to all. Buenos días y buenas tardes. Les doy la más cordial bienvenida a este
I
seminario.
cordially welcome you to this seminar regarding the measurement of international service trade, relevance and experiences, organized by the National Institute of Geography and Statistics in Mexico, INEGI. We will have the participation of experts from the World Trade Organization for the OECD, the UNGAS regarding trade and development, the Statistical Division of the United Nations, Portugal's Bank, and the Economic Analysis Office of the United States of America. We certainly appreciate your kindness for participating in this seminar. In a particular way, let me appreciate the dissemination of this event for ECLAC through its broadcasting network of knowledge. During recent years, international trade of services has had a considerable increase. This dynamism calls for information to quantify the trade flows of services internationally. In accordance to the World Trade Organization, the trade of services has grown at a higher pace than that of merchandise. An important data is that between 1980 and 2015, the average participation of services in the GDP has gone from 42% to 55%. So with these international trade service area statistical information, we need to know more information regarding the structural transformation promoted by the use of technology, basically digital technology. In 2021, INEGI conducted the International Service Trade Survey, which complements and strengthens the statistical supply in our country through the generation and outreach of statistical information regarding this particular area. Basically, this survey contributes to the measurement of the income and expenses that companies have with companies abroad, given the segregations, commercial partners, and supplies. The international service trade has valuable information for national accounts and also for the analysis of trade in terms of added value, global value chains, the bilateral asymmetries of trade and services with our main partners, and the estimation of digital trade. The outcomes of this information program are available for you since the past September 29th. Online, we are foreseeing to keep this breaking down information by country and partner and way of supply, which has been very welcomed by users. In the following years, we shall continue contributing with the generation of statistical innovating information, as it has always been the vocation at INEGI. I certainly value your interest and your attendance to this seminar. I am certain that it will be a very fruitful session. We certainly appreciate the chairperson of INEGI, our president, for sending us a message. She was unable to be with us today, given her agenda. So we kindly request all of the participants to please mute your microphone, and whenever needed, we will be able to open up your microphone. Let me share with you that as the instructions stated, there is a globe icon in the lower part of your screen where you may select the language of your choice. You may follow it in either English or Spanish. We will be having different presentations in English. Some others will be presented in Spanish, and we will continue our webinar in these two languages. Let me appreciate all of the participants for being here right on time for your different participations and presentations that you have shared with us very kindly. So the seminar has two major sections. The first section is related with the relevance of international service trade area in the global sphere, where we will have the participation of 4 speakers from 4 international organizations that are different. We have already mentioned on behalf of our president of INEGI that we will have someone from WTO, also from UNCTAD, OECD, and United Nations, from the Statistical Division of the United Nations. After a break and a Q&A session, the second section will be touching some experiences of countries in the collection of statistical information regarding the services international trade, where we will have Portugal's bank participating, the Bureau of Economic Analysis of the United States, and on behalf of INEGI, we will have Araceli Martinez Gama, and then also questions and answers to end up our seminar around 11:30. So in order not to make this first section of our welcoming messages too long, let me go straight into the first presentation that will be given by Barbara de Andrea. She is a senior statistical officer at the Statistical Division of the WTO. Throughout the years, Barbara has conducted activities in the creation of capacities in capacity building for service trade, and she has been publishing in different journals. She's been the co-chair and coordinator of the Interinstitutional Working Group of the United Nations regarding international trade statistical information, and she has a long career in the WTO, where she started as a junior statistical officer, and she has continued as in the information and technical collaboration of the environment. Barbara, the floor is yours. We certainly appreciate your participation. Your presentation is the relevance of the identification of partners and the supply ways within the statistical information regarding trade services. Barbara, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arturo. Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Is it okay? Hello?
Yes, yes.
Is it okay? Great. Yes. I have double screen, so So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank INEGI for inviting the WTO to present. And a special thanks also to Gerardo. Trade negotiators have very specific needs. A crucial piece of information for them is bilateral trade statistics. However, while in merchandise trade, partner data is largely available also at a very disaggregated product level, 28 years after the entry into force of the general agreements of trading services here in the WTO, trading services statistics still present profound gaps. For example, due to the lack of data, we could specify bilaterally only 29% of South and Central America and the Caribbean total pre-pandemic services trade. And you can see from the chart that no bilateral transactions were reported by African or Middle Eastern economies. Of course, the share here for Europe rises to more than 90%. However, when we move at an individual services sector, the coverage can be much lower. But we will hear more about this from Antonella in her presentation. Now, the lack of bilateral trade data is problematic also in the context of bilateral or regional trade agreements covering services, for which there is also a notification obligation in the WTO if for member countries, obviously. As you can see in the chart, partner data is required for trading services on a balance of payments basis, but also at the second line for foreign affiliate trade statistics. And this takes me to the second data need of negotiators and policymakers in the area of services. Because unlike goods, which can only be traded cross-border, there are multiple ways for trading services internationally. And cross-border supply, also so-called Mode 1, is only one of them. This way, although I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with the modes of supply, it's a good idea to briefly recap. So there's multiple ways, as I said, to supply services internationally are called modes in the WTO. They were identified in the WTO GATS. So in Mode 1, the services supplier and the service consumer remain in their respective territory, and it's only the supply of the service that crosses the border, for example, through digital means, and increasingly so, but also through traditional means like the post. Examples are online courses, but also legal advice, for example, provided through the phone. In Mode 2, it is the service consumer that is abroad in the territory of the service supplier and consumes services there, for example, in tourism, but it can be also the property of the consumer that is, for example, undergoing repair, like a ship. We all remember the Evergreen stuck in the Suez Canal some months ago. But it can also be goods undergoing processing in foreign countries. When we move to Mode 3, commercial presence, it is really clear that the definition of services trade in the GATS is much broader than the BOP concepts of services trade. Because in commercial presence, we cover also certain type of transactions between the residents of the same economies. It's a dimension that the balance of payments for its own nature cannot capture. So in mode 3, it records the sale in mode C. It is the commercial presence, it is services that are supplied by a juridical person through the establishment of commercial presence in another country. For example, the branch of a bank, or a foreign-owned hospital, a foreign school, and we will only record and capture the local supply of services. So local supply means to local consumers. Finally, in mode 4, it is the service supplier that moves to the territory of the service consumer and provides services there. It's a natural person, so it can be an independent service supplier, like a self-employed IT consultant, or the person can be sent by his or her company to the foreign country and to provide services to the consumers. Another option is that the natural person, in the context of a commercial presence, is transferred by the mother company, by the employer, to work in the branch established abroad, and which then in turn will supply services to the local consumer, so that the service supply, it is through mode 3. Now these modes, this GATS definition of services with the different modes has been adopted also in subsequent bilateral and regional trade agreements. And services commitments, so undertaken by countries, are normally by detailed services sectors and by in each mode of supply. So an ideal data set would require that each services sector is disaggregated also by each mode of supply. And although there have been many efforts over the recent years, we don't really have an official data set by mode of trading services disaggregated by mode of supply at the global level. Now, with the incomplete of limited trading services statistics, they result in several constraints at the negotiating table. In fact, with little or no basis at all, then anecdotal data, services trade negotiators are definitely in a weaker position than their colleagues dealing with merchandise trade, because their negotiating options are limited in a sense that we know data. Negotiators find it difficult to determine the true impact of a given negotiating position, and the possible benefits cannot be fully measured. Thus, the lack of sufficient data hinders the identification of what can be suitable solution and intervention. The whole thing is leading to inefficient negotiations that a good set of statistics would have facilitated. Now, moving back to the work of statistician, to measure trading services, the MSITS 2010 suggests a simplified allocation of balance of payment services statistics to modes 1, 2, and 4 of the GATS, and foreign affiliate statistics to mode 3. But also here we have some difficulties, because we have to estimate only the local sales that are, in general, not available even in foreign affiliate statistics for most countries which compile them. Of course, the other option is to develop proper surveys, for example, to determine the share on mode 4, or other types of service to request information on each of the 3 modes in the BOP, mode 1, 2, and 4, or eventually, but more complicated, to ask for data on each mode of supply, which is even more difficult. So given the lack of data, of official data, there was an urgent need to address policymakers and trade negotiators' needs in terms of data. and to develop some estimates by mode of supply to get a comprehensive picture of services trade through all the 4 modes of supply. So thanks to European Commission grants, the WTO could develop that so-called Tismos dataset, the trading services by mode of supply dataset, which is an experimental dataset based on reported data by national authorities to the extent possible and complemented with estimation as close as possible to MSITS 2010 recommendation. The purpose, of course, it is to satisfy these trade negotiators' needs to have a data set with services broken down to the 4 modes of supply, to monitor and analyze services trade. And also we have to take into account that mode 1 largely reflects digitally delivered services trade. And so this is particularly relevant to the work that we are doing together with the OECD, with the IMF and UNCTAD on digitally delivered trade in the handbook and the revision of the handbook on measuring digital trade. So one issue that we had with MSITS is that MSITS suggested this allocation, but remained silent on how to split services transaction across the different modes of supply. The MSITS suggested that transactions should be allocated to the dominant mode of supply or to split among 2 modes when a dominant one could not be determined. So the Tismos dataset, and this is the original table, the allocation table that's been used in the Tismos disseminated in 2019, allocates EBOPs to 2010 services items to different modes of supply. So this is the second table. And also we had another issue, how to deal with distribution services which are not separately identifiable in EBOPs, in services transaction, as they are already included in the value of goods traded internationally. So the result of the Tismos dataset, which was released, as I said, in 2019, covering 200 economies for the period 2005 to 2017, and a very large number of sectors, were also presented in our World Trade Report 2019, fully dedicated to the future of services trade. And we could get already some very valuable information from this data set. First of all, that distribution services, it is the largest traded sectors. And this you cannot get this information unless distribution services are estimated also in foreign affiliate statistics, and that mode 3 is the largest traded sector. The largest mode for trading services internationally. So is the dominant mode, representing almost 60% of traded services in 2017. Now, more recent data was produced last year for internal use also show the impacts of COVID on global trading services by mode of supply. So with some data for 2019, see still this dominant mode for mode 3, and also the impact with decreased shares of mode 2 and mode 4 in 2020 resulting of COVID, due to the COVID and the border restrictions. This also more recent work published this year with the availability of statistics by modes of supply. You also be able to track and to measure individual services sectors for which we know very little, like in the case of medical services, a sector for which data is really hard to find. And in this case, I mean, you can see that while the the share of Mode 2, the value of Mode 2 and of 4, and the relative share dropped for medical services, for world trading medical services. Supply through Mode 1 increased by 14%, thanks to telehealth, so thanks to digital means. And in fact, with increased digitalization, the Mode 1 dimension is particularly important. And according to our new estimates based on Tismos, with also revised shares, global exports of digitally delivered services more than tripled since 2005, outpacing the growth of goods exports and also of other services that are not digitally deliverable. As we know, this growth was also further boosted by the pandemic due to remote working, learning, entertaining. And the value of digitally delivered services exports was 30% above the pre-pandemic levels to reach an estimated $3.71 trillion. Let me just conclude with my last slide, is that to say that the WTO closely cooperated, Eurostat, but also with other, with the OECD and countries, providing important compilation guidance on the measurement of trading services by model supply. And at the moment, the reference is really the Eurostat compiler's guide on international supply of service by model supply, containing also the Eurostat model. On our
we
side,
can't hear, Barbara, we can't hear well. We can't hear well.
Huh? Sorry? I can hear some background noise speaking. Anyway, the next on our side is to release the Tismos dataset in early 2023. And of course, our wish list to address the specific needs of trade negotiators, policymakers, is to add a bilateral dimension to Tismos, so to be able to track services transaction by mode of supply, by sector, by mode of supply, and by partner. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Bárbara, por tu estupenda presentación.
We thank you, Barbara, for your excellent presentation. Now we shall give the floor to our next presentation by our first panel that has to do with the Conference of the United Nations regarding trade and development, UNGAS, and the presentation will be led by two persons. First, Onno Hoffmeister. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your family name. He's the head of the Unit of Statistical Production of UNCTAD, and by Sanja Blazevic, who is also working in statistical information with UNCTAD. And Mrs. Blazevic is in the statistical office, and she's in charge on behalf of UNCTAD of the collection, improving the data collection regarding service trade of UNCTAD and the WTO. The floor is yours now.
Hello, good morning. I hope you can hear me well and also see my screen. Maybe not.
Yes, we see it. Oh, no.
You see my presentation screen?
The presentation, no.
Okay, 1 second. I will share again. Now?
Yes.
Excellent. So good morning again. Many thanks for inviting UNCTAD to this webinar. It's a pleasure for me to, and also for Sanja, who is in the audience, to participate. Trade and services is for UNCTAD an important domain, especially as the development of the services sector is a main driver of economic development and for structural transformation. So when we speak about statistics in trade and services, it has indeed many challenges. And we have also tools and resources to cope with these challenges. So the structure of my presentation is already given in the title in a way. Challenges, tools, and resources. I will start with the challenges. And there are many challenges in a trade and services compilation. And the challenges begin already with the very nature of services. Services, in contrast to goods, are in general intangible. We cannot see, feel, or smell them. According to the definitions in the SNA and BPM6, they are production activities, more specifically production activities that change the conditions of the consuming units or facilitate exchange rather than physical objects. And this has implications for measurement. We cannot just go and count the volumes of objects that cross the border or changed ownership between residents and non-residents. Now, in principle, we need to register the production activities in the very moment in which they occur. Or what is an alternative, a way we can ask the actors about the services transactions which they did in the past. So and this is in principle done in register data. For example, the International Transaction Reporting System is a case in point, which is an important data source for international trade and services statistics in many countries. However, it's also a very basic source, which has its shortcomings. Transactions are proxied by settlements. For non-cash transactions, they are not covered. We have high omissions. And these data do not provide much level of detail concerning the service category. Some countries have started using credit card records and obtained very good results with that. However, these data are not always easy to get, partly due to confidentiality rules. So surveys play an important role in trade and services statistics compilation, but surveys also have their shortcomings. We need a sample frame, ideally a business register, to be able to design the survey in a proper way and to translate the results collected from the sample population then to the population total using weighting. We will need to deal with non-response, both item and unit non-response. And then we all know that running a survey is costly and causes a burden on the respondents. Another specificity of the trade and services statistics compilation is that each service category requires often a specific data source. What works well for the collection of data on financial services cannot be used for the collection of data on transportation or construction services or maintenance and repair services or travel. So we need a number of different data collections. So far, the challenges concerning the data sources, but there are much more challenges in the overall compilation environment. Some service categories have their, they start with the IT infrastructure. For example, we need good systems for data exchange and for compilation. Then those involved in compilation need knowledge, first technical and statistical knowledge, but also good knowledge about the concepts and methods to be applied. We need the different agencies involved in trade and services compilation need to work together. We need good institutional arrangements, if possible, backed up maybe by legislative acts. We need sufficient financial resources. And we all know that the statistics is not the most important topic in the budget discussion at national level usually. And then finally, we need also to respect the confidentiality of the respondents. And this may pay off in terms of trust, because when respondents see that their confidentiality is well respected, they will also report well to our surveys and non-response, and the survey error will be relatively small. Then we have compilation challenges in all the specific categories which are specific to the individual service item. For example, manufacturing services on physical inputs owned by others. We have the problem that we have to separate the manufacturing fee from the actual value of the good which was traded and is recorded in the good statistics. In construction, we have to take into account the project duration, as we know. We need to know something about foreign control so that we can distinguish this from an FDI or from an FDI. In travel, this is usually challenging to catch all, so we need multiple surveys, border surveys, ideally accompanied by enterprise surveys of the involved gastronomy sector. And so for all the different items, we have specific challenges. Mexico nowadays reports data on quite many service categories to the IMF, we see. However, manufacturing services and constructions, which I just mentioned here, are still missing what our small investigation suggests, although they can be expected to be significant. So this could be an indication that data on these categories are indeed challenging to compile in Mexico. And we know that it always depends on the specific conditions in the country. And then we have new challenging domains. Barbara already just mentioned a few of them. One growing domain is digitalization of trade. Barbara has just mentioned. With digital trade, we mean trade which is digitally ordered or digitally delivered. And this applies to a growing proportion of the overall trade. Also in UNCTAD, we see that digitally deliverable trade has increased considerably. Between 2010 and 2021, the share of the digitally deliverable services in total services increased from 47 to 63. So from a little bit less than a half to almost 2/3 of total services trade. And the share in all trade, goods and services, increased from 10 to 14%. The last UNCTAD Digital Economy report showed that the number of cross-border online shoppers almost doubled from 2016 to 2019. And we can expect that after the pandemic, it is already much higher. This digitalization of trade causes a number of new challenges. We need to rethink and adapt our concepts for measuring international trade. For this, OECD, WTO, IMF, UNCTAD, we are working together on the handbook of measuring digital trade, and soon will be released a new version of it. Trade is increasingly realized through digital platforms and by private households and consumers. So we need to adapt our data collection instruments. First, we can directly target the digital platforms because they know to whom the services are delivered. And we need to target the individual households, and this can be challenging because they are very much spread over the whole country. And so we need new data collection instruments. And then finally, it's not always easy to identify the actual supplier. We usually know over which platform or how the service was transmitted, but who was the original, the initial supplier of the service. And so it's not always so easy to distinguish between transmission and actual service transaction. And then we have increasing demand for specific categories of services trade. We have a creative economy where researchers are, and also governments are interested to know how much of the services trade is creative, in the sense that it is goods. It concerns goods which involve a certain aspect of innovation and maybe research. Then in UNCTAD we have big demand for ocean services data because the SITS and other countries which are affected by a rising sea level, they have specific conditions, and we try to increasingly help them. IMF has a special interest on fintech and also many other governments. So these are growing areas, and these require more detail in the service categories. And these detailed levels are usually not mandatory. Countries can deliver them, but especially those with weaker statistical systems are not always able to do that. Then we have a growing demand for further differentiation. Barbara, I think, just gave us an excellent introduction into that. Modes of supply, STEC, where we want to know more about the sector from which the enterprises. We want to know more about the enterprises which deliver the service. FATS, gender, we want to know more about the sex of the traders. And this is challenging because we need more variables in our surveys, or we need to start linking business with trade statistics. So far about the challenges. I think there were already not a few, there were quite many. So now I turn to the tools. One important tool we noticed for the building up of knowledge is learning instruments. And one has been developed by UNCTAD, WTO, and UNSD together, is the Train for Trade e-learning program in statistics and international trade and services. It's focusing on the target group, mainly the services statistics compilers. Secondary target group are the users of statistics and trade and service statistics. The goals are enhancing the knowledge of concepts and methods, enhancing compilation skills, and providing guidance in solving specific compilation challenges. This tool is has the advantage that it's based on online training. So in principle, it can be rolled out all over the world for very low additional marginal costs. And so compilers from all over the world can just register and do the training. But it's not only online, it's also accompanied by a face-to-face element, which are the on-site workshops. So at the end of the training, which is a 6 weeks training, we invite the most active or distinguished participants where we think they really made a good contribution, also looking at their performance in the trainings, to on-site workshops, and have usually very good exchange and discussions about specific practical issues and network building, so that even after the workshop, compilers can stay in touch with their fellows from the other countries. And the specific instruments are online lectures, as I just said. We have 6 modules. We have a manual where participants can learn on their own. And we have an online forum where people can get into contact with each other and discuss specific issues, but especially also to raise questions to the facilitator, who is a distinguished expert chosen by us. We follow up on the progress, checking their performance with quizzes and tests. and see how good they somehow acquired the knowledge. In 2022, we had again around 1,000 people all over the world from 144 countries participating in the training. Almost gender balanced, 462 are female, 530 are male. And we have, this time even 4 in the third category. Whoever is interested to know more can have a look in the statistical journal of the IAOS, of the International Association of Official Statistics, where we made a stock taking of our online training and reviewed our methods. So whoever wants to know more can have a look. This is one tool what I wanted to present. Another tool is more technical, which is a Teststat. It's a trade and services compilation system. It is modular, so different modules can be exchanged with each other and applied to the specific context of the country and adapted. And the different modules are sampling, data collection, data cleaning, aggregation, alignment, and reporting. So that means over the whole process from data collection to dissemination, we provide a technical tool which countries can use to implement their trade and services compilation. For the case that the compilation is based on an enterprise survey. This has been developed together with UEMOA, which is the regional organization of the monetary, economic, and monetary and economic union of Western Africa. And this has just been finished, this project, and we launched the tool last week. In principle, it could once become an executor for trade and services. So far about tools, now about resources. We know about the knowledge resources. The main standards are laid down in the Balance of Payments and International Investment Position Manual, BPM6, and the complementing compilers guide. Then we have a specific on international trade and services, more in detail, the Manual on Statistics of International Trade and Services 2010, where all the problem areas, sources to be used, compilation guidelines are given. And we have a more specific compiler's guide. Data sources, I mentioned already the International Transactions Reporting System. Then, as I said, enterprise surveys play an important role. Household surveys with the digitalization, maybe more and more. Border surveys, which can accompany enterprise surveys, especially in the case of travel. Credit card records are increasingly used with success, but not always easy to get because we have to respect confidentiality rules. Business associations, especially when we have a few big traders, it makes sense to apply directly to them, or usually they are organized in a business association and we can get data from there. Financial records, international merchandise trade statistics, especially, for example, for transport, and not the least, mirror data. So countries can get in touch with their trading partner and reconcile their statistics. This is something what we did also in the UEMOA project, so that we can be sure that within a region already the statistics are aligned. And the more we do it on the global level, the better become our data. So then finally, I want to quickly mention the cross-national data sets. where we have, which is an important resource, I think, for global data when we want to do a analysis at world level.
Sorry, Otto, only 1 minute, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry for being a bit longer. The WTO UNCTAD Statistics on International Trade and Services dataset, which is a compilation based on the already existing data, and we reconcile and we collect already published data also at national level. Then we all know the IMF balance of payment statistics, and UNSD have their own data collection for UNCTAD, trade and services statistics. At regional level, we have Eurostat, OECD, and the regional organizations. And I wanted to show here also the experimental data sets, which Barbara already mentioned. I don't remember if she mentioned also BATIS, the effort to compile balanced trade and services statistics by OECD and WTO. So all this feeds together. What I want to show with this graph at the end is that we want to help when we provide assistance in improving the tools, improving the sources, improving the knowledge. We provide help at the national level so that at the national level, the trade and services statistics improve. But when they improve at national level, also they improve at the global level. And the global level can also be used to interact. So we can compare our data with data from other sources. And at the end, it all fits together. And our vision is in a way to help with capacity building or technical assistance in the country, to help the country as such, but at the same time also to help to enhance global statistics. And with this, I'm already at the end. I thank you very much for the attention.
Muchas gracias, Onno.
De nada.
Gracias por la excelente presentación.
Thank you for such an excellent presentation. Remember, you may ask questions over the chat. We'll get to them during the Q&A session. Let's move on to the next presentation from Antonella, Liberatore, Chief of the MSITS Department at OECD, with over 2 years of experience, with active contribution to developing international guidelines to face the emergent challenges in measuring international trade, mainly the global value chains and digitalization of transactions. Welcome, Antonella. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arturo. Thank you very much, INEGI, for inviting the OECD as well to this seminar. It's always a pleasure for me to talk about trade and services statistics. So I think this presentation fits nicely with the two preceding ones. So we're going to talk about asymmetries and BATIS. So let me share my screen. The structure of my presentation is quite simple. So we start with the question why we need the BATIS, which is the OECD WTO balanced trade and services dataset. Then I'm going to go through a little bit on, on the description of, about how we built BATIS, and then I'm going to explain how to access and use it, and I will show you also some still stylized facts about trade and services in the Americas, and then some next steps. So the fundamental problem and the fundamental rationale why basically we need the BATIS was already mentioned several times, and in particular by Barbara at the beginning of her presentation. So she was saying that bilaterally specified trade is actually very scarce. So I think she showed something for the years before the pandemic. I am sharing here some figures. So the coverage of the bilaterally specified trade was 32% of world trade in 2005, which then increased quite a bit to 66% in 2018. So there is improvement, that's for sure, but there is a lot of heterogeneity, and still these figures are not enough. If we go by region, Barbara showed, so we have some regions with absolutely no bilateral data, as we saw before. And if we go by sector, well, you can see here in this little tiny pie charts that in many cases, the bilaterally specified trade is less than a half of world trade. So the scarcity of trading services data, of bilateral trading services data, is the first problem that we want to address with BATIS. Then the second problem is that even when we have bilateral data, then we encounter some very interesting situations where it can happen then that countries report trade surpluses with each other. So this is of course a very old example from the FT in 2015, but I still keep it in my slides because it's quite telling. So the problem, of course, the underlying problem is very large asymmetries in trading services, which hinder basically the ability of using. I mean, this data, they really have a very negative impact on the trust of that users have in statistics. Regarding the causes for asymmetries, I mean, we know them. Onno also went through, this well-known challenges that exist in compiling trading services statistics. So we know that it's not easy to produce high-quality trading services statistics. And in particular, the OECD has been working on this issue for many years, trying to facilitate bilateral, trilateral meetings, trying to improve, let's say, communication and data sharing across countries, but we haven't really seen a lot of improvement over time. And this is because at the same time, I mean, while we work on trying to improve data quality, then the transactions themselves, they become more difficult to track. And this is related to digitalization, GBCs, and some of the other challenges that were mentioned before. So it seems that we are not improving that much on this front. And these large asymmetries that we see at bilateral level, then of course appear also if we aggregate everything at the world level. So we can see that export and imports of travel at world level are quite well aligned. Also business services, somehow the asymmetries, they cross out each other. So there are not, I mean, we cannot really see big asymmetries at world level. But then if we dig into some other sectors, then the situation is really quite bad. Transport imports are much larger than exports at world level. And this is very much related to the component of freight transportation, which, as you know, is something that's not directly measured, but mostly modeled and estimated. And this creates a lot of asymmetries. Then we have also very large asymmetries in financial services and in insurance services. So this, of course, results in different shares at world level when we look at export and imports, which of course shouldn't be the case. So the response, let's say our response from international organizations perspective was to create BATIS as an analytical data set. So I really need to stress that this is analytical or experimental, as it was said. So we don't want to replace official statistics at all. But we wanted to create a tool which is complete. So BATIS is a complete matrix which covers 200 economies, over 200 economies, and there's no data gaps. It is also consistent. So the hierarchy between parents and children items is respected, and importantly, the data are balanced. We have started to work with WTO on this project many years ago. So I think we started in 2015 or something. The first edition of BATIS was published in 2017, and the second edition at the beginning of 2021, the BPM6 BATIS. In very brief terms, well, we collect, of course, everything which is already available, building on work that is done by others and not trying to reinvent the wheel. Then we have a system for estimating missing information, so filling all the data gaps. Then we have, of course, a part which we have to ensure overall consistency. And finally, we have the trade balancing. It's important to underline that we always use a top-down approach in BATIS. So we start with the total services with partner world. Then we go to the service categories still with partner world. And here I have to say that unfortunately, I mean, due to the resources, we can only cover the 12 main service categories that are in BPM6 plus total services. Once we have that, then we start looking at bilateral services total, and then we finally go through to the service items at bilateral level. I will not go into the details of the construction not to take too much time, but I will just say that well, we start with the WTO UNCTAD Trade and Services dataset, the one that was just mentioned by Onno a few seconds ago. So this dataset is the best in the market, although it is free. So we build on that, and this provides the boundaries for BATIS. To that, we add bilateral information sourced through official data sets, so the OECD, Eurostat, national sources, and UNSD. And once we have collected all that information, we put that into the BATIS machine to go through all of the estimation and adjusting stages. Sometimes information is provided at bilateral level, but it is not complete. So we have some techniques to fill in the data gaps when some partial information is available. And in some other cases, bilateral information is completely missing for a specific reporter, partner, and category combination. So in that case, we use models. In particular, we use gravity models, a set of around 90 gravity models. So it's many models, but they're very simple. And they are on purpose very simple. So we use some standard techniques
Usamos una técnica estándar para estimar estas relaciones bilaterales, y una vez que contamos con ello, la métrica se despliega completamente. Esto resume básicamente cómo avanza de los datos reportados hasta la matriz completa, y como pueden ver una vez más, los valores porcentuales y la cobertura de información bilateral no es tan buena, es alrededor de 50-55% en todo el lapso de tiempo, pero si contamos el punto de datos, la información es muy baja. Solo el 10% de toda la matriz de servicios a través de los datos reportados. Y con ello tenemos autorizaciones, correcciones, lo que tiene que ver con las interpolaciones, tanto de back y nowcasting, y también los modelos. No tengo tiempo de entrar en detalles, pero tenemos toda esta información disponible para ustedes. Ahora, una vez, perdón.
Pedro, en los canales de la traducción están al revés.
I believe that the interpretation channels are the other way around.
I hope not.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, Antonella, go ahead, please.
No problem. I mean, I could have done this in Spanish, but my Spanish is quite rusty. Next time. So I was saying that, well, once we have our complete matrices, well, we have to make sure that the matrices are consistent with the reported work totals. As I said, those are our boundaries for the estimations. So we try to keep as much as possible the reported information as such. So we try not to touch it. if we feel it is consistent and with sufficient quality. Of course, if it doesn't, if the information reported it doesn't fit with the world boundaries, then we have to make some adjustments there. And at the end, we have a simple biproportional rescaling program which eliminates any residual inconsistency and really ensures a complete square of the matrices. The final step is then the balancing. So the balance value that we have in BATIS is nothing else than a weighted average between the reported and the mirror flow. But we have two layers of weighing. So a first layer is based on what we call a symmetry index, which is a measure of how much a country is in general aligned with what its partners report. This is the first layer, and you can see here on the right that we have plotted some of these symmetry indices. So values closer to 1 mean that the data are more aligned with the partner, so the symmetry is higher, and basically the balanced value will be, I mean, the weight of the reported information will be higher if the symmetry index is higher for that particular country year and flow. I plotted here 2005 and 2018 symmetry indices, from which you can see that, to be honest, there is not a lot of improvement over time. There is for some countries, but it doesn't, I mean, we don't really see a trend of improving, these asymmetries. And then we have a second layer, which takes into account the quality of the figure. So, of course, the reported data are considered of higher quality with respect to our estimates or back in forecasting, which are also considered better than the gravity models that we use. At the end, we use a calculation method, I mean, a simple formula, which was developed in cooperation with the Eurostat Figaro team. So this formula for balancing is the same, which is used for all the TIVA-related, let's say, initiative, because you know, I mean, you may know that the balanced data set have this very direct application in TIVA-related work and input-output tables. Still, we continue with this top-down approach. So we balanced total services first, and then we go into the categories. And the categories are balanced in terms of shares, so that we always ensure internal consistency of the matrix. So BATIS is disseminated through the OECD and the WTO through different means, including APIs. But what I want to stress is that while we have the data file, while we have also some codes, I mean, a codes file which explains what we do. And in particular, it explains all of the methodology codes which we use in our estimations, because we want it to be as transparent as possible in the construction of this. So you see here an example of what is the data that we publish, and you will see that there are 3 values that we publish. So one is the reported value when available. One is what we call final value. So it's the value after all of our processing and estimation. So if there is no value, well, that would be our estimation. If the value is reported, then the final value will reflect some of the adjustments that we may or may not do, so can be very close to the reported value or can be a little bit different. And then we have this field, which is the final value methodology, which is really important. So we really try to distinguish for each individual data point what we did with that, if it's reported and if it's adjusted or if it's modeled, how. So we have around 30 methodological codes, to ensure really the maximum transparency in this. And finally, of course, we have the balanced value, which is the same for exports and mirror imports, for instance. Just a couple of slides to show you a little bit of what we have in the Americas according to BATIS. So at the aggregate level, so aggregating all of the exports of total services of all of the countries and the economies in the Americas, we can see that the balanced figures are a little bit higher than the reported figures. So it seems that in the Americas, there is a little bit of underestimation of the trading services, of the exports of services. And this is true for all partners. I mean, I have here a breakdown, and you can see that most of the trade occurs with the rest of the world and not intra-regional, meaning mostly with Europe, but also Asia. This is a very similar slide, but we have the different, some of the main economies in the Americas. So we have export and imports and an average of the total services for 2005 to 2019. So here I'm showing the ratio between the balanced and the reported trade. So if the ratio is bigger than 1, the balanced trade, so the final figures that we published, are bigger than the reported. And as I said before, this is mostly the case for economies in the Americas, including Mexico. So especially for exports, but also for imports, it seems that the current figures that are available for Mexico are a little bit underestimating what is the actual trade of Mexico according to its trading partners. There are some other interesting features that we can see in BATIS. One is what I call the invisible trade issue. I mean, there are some cases where asymmetries are really huge. Bermuda is one of these. Balanced exports of services of Bermuda are 50 times higher than the reported exports. For other countries, an asymmetry of 10-20% is what we considered quite normal. Of course, a difference of 50 times is something quite unusual, and it reflects the fact that most probably a lot of transactions that go through foreign-owned multinationals are completely undetected in the Bermuda's statistics. But I also have here an example of something quite interesting from Mexico. So up to now, Mexico has not been able to measure manufacturing services. This was something that also Onno mentioned, but with the new survey that we're going to hear about later, this is hopefully going to change. So they have produced some estimates of their trading manufacturing services, which is very important. So I would be very curious to see how this compare with our estimates in BATIS. I am pretty sure that our BATIS estimates are still underestimates. Are still a little bit on the lower bound because we miss a lot of information about manufacturing services in North America. But this is just to show that the trade which is not reported by countries then becomes evident in BATIS, once you take into account the mirror data and the estimations that we make. So this is something that we're going to update soon. I'm going to finish here. Of course, as I said before, BATIS does not mean we don't want to replace in any case, official statistics with BATIS. This is analytical, as I said, experimental. So the most important is to work on the official statistics and to improve the quality of those. There is a new expert group that was just created a year ago at the OECD at the initiative of the UK Office for National Statistics. So we have this group that has been meeting a couple of times. This is a group which is completely self-driven. They decide what they want to do, and we act as facilitators. They are investigating possible causes of asymmetries, and at the end of the day, it's always a matter of data quality, as we said. So we're investigating, and sharing compilation issues and trying to improve the data quality at the origin, which would then reflect lower asymmetries in theory. So this we think is still priority, and it's something that we really, we really think it's important. In terms of BATIS itself, of course, we recognize the use of BATIS, and we will still update it. Currently, we're working on biannual updates, and we are going to update it in early 2023 with data up to 2021. Then we have some upgrade plans with the WTO. Barbara had a wish list. I put medium-term plans. I don't know which one is more reflecting of the reality, but yes, we do want. We do know that more detailed sectoral breakdown would be ideal. So we hope that at some point we will work on that, and ideally, as Barbara said, to merge the modes of supply with the bilateral dimension would be good for users. I will stop here. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Antonella. Muy interesante la presentación.
We thank you, Antonella. Your presentation is quite interesting. And basically, the data that you have provided us in regards to our country. Let's go to our last presentation of this section, where we will have Markie Muryawan, is currently head of the statistical section and trade office of the United Nations Statistical Commission, and Mark is actively participating in the big data program for official statistics, and he leads the working group in regards to the IES. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Arturo Blancas. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here to give you an update on the latest progress on the revisions of International Trade Statistics Manual. I think that you're going to share the presentations, or it should be me. Let me share the screen. Okay.
We can see it.
Yes,
okay.
Good.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so this will be a very quick overview because we have a lot of things that we need to cover, but we don't have enough time. So as you know that we are embarking basically on the revisions of macroeconomic statistics manuals, which is for us is a balance of payment, right? And we also, in additions, we also revising the manual on statistics of international trade in services and also international merchandise trade statistics. So all of these are being revised also in the conjunctions of the revisions of the system of national accounts. So we started basically the process officially in 2021 with the endorsement by statistical commissions to revise IMTS 2010 and MSITS 2010. So in 2022, this year, so we provided the progress update to the commissions. You can also look at our background documents on the progress of update. Maybe I will share it also in the chat so that you can have it as a reference. So basically, we are engaging on the revisions by splitting the work on first horizontal, which is a cross-statistical domain, including the integration between business and trade statistics, and vertical, which is usually our traditional work, that the work relations between trade statistics and macroeconomic framework, and also on the data sources. This year, though, the commissions decided for preparations of international trade indicators. So as part of the manuals of the principal indicators on the business and trade statistics that has been released as the volume 1. So this is mostly business statistics indicator. So the commission also asked us to develop the manual on the international trade indicators, right, including services. So the revisions is basically managed by the task team on international trade statistics under the UN Committee of Experts on Business and Trade Statistics, right? Just to give you an overview, the task team is led by Morocco and Portugal, and then in the Latin America and Caribbean, we have Mexico, Costa Rica, Jamaica, and Brazil. This is just a little bit more detail on the vertical and horizontal integration. So vertical basically is our work, our traditional work with a balance of payment and SNA, and also with the data sources. But something that is more interesting is these horizontal integrations that we're trying to integrate the trade statistics, right? In this case, services on the globalization, digitalization, well-being, and sustainability. I think this is also mentioned by Onno's presentations, right? On the specific domains at the end. This is a list of the research agenda. I think that the slides has been shared with you, so you can have this as a reference. So we split this into whether this is a conceptual framework or this is more into compilation issues. Something that is important is we can focus more on the yellow highlights, which is the vertical. So we are looking at the scope of IMTS and MSITS, basically the scope between goods and services. We are also looking at the impact of the BPM updates that I will have a specific slides. We are looking at the informal cross-border trade, right? Because this is also something that is important in certain countries. And then for the good side, so we are looking at the trade flow valuations and evaluations of using invoice values. And then there are some other things that we are looking at. On the horizontal part, so we are talking about the cross-cutting issues. So digital trade, right? So this is something that is very important. So global value chain is also will be recognized in the next manual, and something that is very important also this the linking of business and trade statistics, right? This is also including the services. I think some of our presenter also mentioned this STAC, which is services by trade and by enterprise characteristics. And of course, we have some other things that relations with the environment and sustainability, trade with the well-being, labor, and so on. And we don't forget, we also have this classification that currently under revisions, which is ISIC and the CPC. So this is just an update on the current account task team, which is under the IMF management. So you can see that most of the issues that they have started to discuss has been approved and posted, right? So the C1 on the recording of transaction-based component of services has been posted. Goods and services accounts by trading enterprise characteristics have been posted, and so on. There is certain thing that needs to be posted, but it will be posted soon. So this is the latest update as of last month. Just to zoom in on the changes. So for the C6, which is the classifications, right? So there are some slight changes, slight reorganizations of the main category of BOPs, right? So the telecommunication, computer services, and information services are split into two as the main categories, and also other business services. They are split into 5, basically, just to expand them. And then we also have supplementary items, adding construction and construction services. So this is, if you are using EBOPs, the extended versions of the BOP for services. So we do already have this, so, but now it's recognized as part of the BOP. There is also an addition, so to have a breakdown of services by currency. So most of the statistic that we've seen is basically converted to US dollar, but in the future we will have on actual currency that the services are being traded. We're also looking at the merchanting aspect to factoryless producers. And also in the C7, they're looking to add the travel packages or to provide clarification on this. The next slide is we are focusing on the cross-cutting and horizontal integration, as I mentioned earlier. So we look at the integration of the business and trade statistics, right? One of the outcome is the development of the dedicated manual that will be focusing on this integration of the business and trade statistics for both goods and services. Another one is the classification related. So the ISIC will be kind of like finalized at the end of this year. So in the next UN Statistical Commission in 2023, so they will look at the ISIC 5. The CPC is deferred to UN Statistical Commission 2004, right? So this is 1 year after ISIC, and EBOPS. This is basically our work. So this will be also follows the timeline of the adoption of the manuals. We also look at the informality part of the trade in services, and of course, digital trade and GVCs. Something that is very important for us that is not yet decided or thoroughly discussed is the scope of goods and services. So in addition to the discussion in the trade task team, we also discussed this in the CPC task team. So this is the group that are looking at the classifications of the central product classifications. And another one is, this is also related to the F18, the recording of the crypto assets in macroeconomic statistics, right? So in the last BOPCOM meeting, so they would consult the user community on how to categorize these crypto assets. And I think the engagement with the user community will start early next year. So finally, we have a timeline. Basically, next year, 2023 and 2024. So by the end of the mid next year, we will basically finalize all of these issues, and then we will start editing, right, including the global consultations. And then at the end of 2024, so we should have a white paper versions of the manual that is ready to be shared, and we plan to be the manuals will be adopted in 2025. And of course, the work continue because with every new manuals, there will be new implementation activities and capacity buildings. So there will be also development for the compilation guides, 2005 and onwards. So how can you contribute? So we will have a certain round of global consultation. So all of you will be included, and you will be reached out. So you can also provide us the feedback during these global consultations. That's it. Thank you for listening, and back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Muchas gracias, Markie.
Thank you, Markie. Thank you very much. Well, we have concluded the first section of this seminar, and I would like briefly to go to the Q&A session. I can see two of them that caught my attention. The first by Ryan. Let me read it in English.
Exports and imports for travel, construction, and government services are equal in both balance of payments and national accounts. Maybe, Barbara, can you help me with the answer or your opinion, please?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gerard. Sorry, thank you, Arturo. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there is no breakdown by sector. I mean, this breakdown by sector is only in the balance of payments. So I'm not sure that you don't have the disaggregation by sector in the SNA. So I hope I'm replying to the question. Can you hear me?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Hay otra pregunta, Edmundo Berumen.
We do have another question for Mr. Berumen.
By region, of what percentage of the obstacles are due to the mistrust to IRS visibility? ¿Alguien quisiera contestar la pregunta?
Anyone willing to respond to this particular question?
Is it about IRTS visibility, or there are so many abbreviations around them? Maybe I just don't catch it in this moment.
It has to do with taxes.
Edmundo.
Edmundo.
Yes. IRS as an internal revenue service. People are afraid of being taxed.
Ah, okay, that's a very interesting question. Because as I said, trust is an important element in compiling statistics. This refers to people who hesitate to report. It is difficult really to catch this number because we don't observe them. I don't know about any particular study on that issue. When we look at mirror data, when we compare things, for example, also in the BATIS, we have possibilities to do quality checks on our data. And of course, this will be one reason for low quality, but there are many other reasons. So it's difficult to get these numbers.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Hay otra pregunta directamente para...
Very good, thank you so much. There is a question directed to Antonella.
On the estimation of trading services of the balance of payments.
Thank you for this questions. I am reading it again. So it's the impact of the underestimations of trading services on the balance of payments. No, we haven't done that. So I assume that your question is related to the fact that this underestimation can lead to different current account balances. No, we haven't done that, but it would be an interesting exercise indeed. Thank you for the question.
Gracias, Antonella. Supongo que para alguna referencia de lo que se comentó hace un momento.
Thank you, Antonella.
Markie hace una referencia aquí de un
manual. Refer to a manual here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Markie. Thank you. I don't see any other questions, so let's give the audience a minute to check if the audience wishes to open up their microphone, to use the hand icon to request to speak. Perhaps it can be done directly. Well, thank you very much. Oh. Francisco Guillén from INEGI.
Thank you very much. I have just a general question, because from one side there is the asymmetries techniques, but on the other hand, there is a lot of challenge in relation with the digital transactions on services. And that means that probably one of the most important things is the valuations. In the case of the digital economy, means the transactions that probably is a tricky view to have market prices in accordance with the manuals. This is one thing. Do you have some view in relation with this? And on the other hand, from the asymmetries, that means another challenge to know what happened with the valuation between transactions and what means from the mirror statistics. Could you tell us something, Antonella? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paco. No sé si alguien quisiera comentar la pregunta.
Who wishes to answer to this question? Did somebody understand the question?
I think it was addressed to Antonella.
Yes,
so.
I can start, but I mean, other speakers, please feel free to come in if you want to complement or if I'm saying something stupid. Thank you, Francisco. I think your question is a good one. I mean, it's a multifaceted question. I mean, on the one hand, you have the impact of the digitalization of transactions in the recording of our normal, let's say, BOP statistics, I mean, trading services statistics. And on the other hand, I mean, are you also asking about, how we measure digital trade in services? So I would say that starting with the latter, so a reminder to everyone is that when we think, I mean, the digital trade domain is still very new, and we're still in thinking about it. But let's say that it's quite established now that our definition is based on the nature of the transaction, so digitally delivered or digitally ordered. And when we talk about services, so it's very much about digital deliveries. So we want to extract this subset of information from our existing BOP statistics. So we want to know what are, having, X amount of services that are exported, how much of this is digitally ordered, digitally delivered, or both. So this is something that, of course, is not easy, but this is what we would like in theory. So adding questions, to your data collection methods, to be able to extract this information. But then going back to the first bit, which is, I think, the most complicated in the sense that, so you were talking about valuation, you were talking about these services that cross border in a digital way and are difficult to value. Absolutely. I mean, the manuals, they have an answer, which is easy on paper, right? So you have valuation rules, for valuation in our manuals. So we want the FOB valuation, we want market prices, etc. We know that some of the transactions are intra-firm, so there might be issues with the pricing of those transactions. I don't have an answer to this, but I'm just sharing some thoughts, and I hope that I'm getting what you meant by your question. Thank you, Francisco.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Antonella, Francisco, por la pregunta. Bien, pues,
thank you, Antonella, and thank you, Francisco, for the question. Time just goes too fast. We can't stop it. We need to stop for a break before we move on to the second part of the seminar. We're running a bit late, so please come back at 10:45 a.m. Mexico City time. You have a 7-minute break. Thank you.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Vamos a continuar con en el seminario. Agradezco antes de arrancar algunos señalamientos que nos hace Christy Howell acerca de una referencia de un manual del Fondo Monetario Internacional. Le agradecemos mucho.
The FMI is here, the IMF is here, and there's a link on the chat. Thank you, Christy, for sending this information. Thank you so much, Christy. Let's resume with the second part of our seminar. The second part is about national experiences in compiling statistics on foreign trade and services. We have three speakers. First, from the Bank of Portugal, the presentation is about the statistics in Portugal. After that, we will have Farello from the United States, and finally Araceli Martinez Gama. She will talk about the INEGI survey, to which our director referred to in the opening statement. Sérgio Branco, he is the head of External Statistics Division of the Bank of Portugal since May 2020. The division is in charge monthly compiling the payment balance and quarterly management of Portugal, as well as the compilation of the necessary data for these statistics. Welcome, Sérgio. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I will share the presentation. Okay, I hope you can see this presentation.
Yes, I can hear. Correct? I can hear and see the presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation to participate in this webinar. And this is an honor and a pleasure to present our statistics and our experience in international trading in services. And our presentation will follow three parts or three sections. First, I will make a context of our statistics and the issue of the trading services. In the second part, I will make a description of our compilation system, focusing on the data sources and the methodology. And finally, just the identification of some of the challenges that we have in the future, or that we are dealing with in the present. And so in terms of context, we have already spoken a bit about this today, but the share of services in international trade is significant. So if we look at the total exports of services in OECD countries, this represents around 26% of total exports of goods and services. And for some countries, for instance, for Portugal, this figure is even higher, and it's around 35% of the total exports of our country. And in most countries, this figure has been increasing steadily during the last decades. And this means that the issue of compiling correct figures on trading services is very important and very relevant, and this means that we should dedicate a big effort on compiling good statistics on this feature of our economy. In our country, in Portugal, as I referred to, the weight of services in our trade is quite big. It's around 35%, as I said, of exports. And this slide show that looking at our current account and looking at, in particular, to the balance of these different categories. If we look at the blue bars, which have the trade in other services and the trade in the travel component of services, we see that if in our country, if we didn't consider this component of trade in services, we would have a very unbalanced current account, which means that our current account is more or less balanced because we have a very positive balance in the trade and service. And this, considering the 9 months of available of 2022, this balance of the services represents around 10% of our GDP, and considering only the travel component, which is the most important item in the services balance of Portugal, this represents around 7% of our GDP, which is quite an important amount. When we look at the current account, both for credits and debits, we see also that the services account for around 1/3 of total credits in the current account, and in the debit side it's a bit lower, it's about 15%, but anyway it's also significant. And the travel component represents around half of the credits part of the services. In the debit side, it's about 1/3 of the services. When we look at the breakdown of the credits and debits of travel in our country, we see that this is quite concentrated in a few countries. So if we consider in the credit side only 5 countries will account for around 60% of our total credit, of our total travel exports. And on the debit side, this is more not so much concentrated, but we also see a big amount concentrated, about 2/3 in only 10 countries. And also when we consider the breakdown by type of service, we also see that we have excluding, if we exclude travel, we have a big concentration on transport, both on the credit and on the debit side. And so this means that the services trade in our country is a very important characteristic of our economy, and so we dedicate a lot of effort on this, on the compilation of this feature of our economy, and this means that the entities that are responsible for the compilation of economic statistics in our country also dedicate a lot of resources on this. And first of all, to make a bit of a context of our situation in Portugal, the compilation of economic statistics in Portugal is performed by 2 entities. We have the Statistical Office, INEGI, and the Central Bank, and there is a division of tasks between the 2 entities in which the Statistical Office dedicates to the compilation of the national financial accounts and international trading inputs, in relation to the external statistics parts. But of course, INEGI has lots of more information that compiles. And in the case of the Central Bank, we are responsible for the compilation of a part of the national accounts, which is the sector financial accounts. And also we are responsible for the compilation of the external current, capital, and financial accounts, and we, in particular, compile external trade in services on a monthly basis. And of course, this having these two entities involved in the compilation of economic statistics means that there is a very strong cooperation between the two entities, and this translates in a very in-depth exchange of information between the two entities, and also a very good integration in terms of methodology, in terms of the way in which the calendars of dissemination are agreed between the two entities, and also a revision policy, which is something that we have to make an understanding between the two entities. And so the main one of the important characteristics of our compilation system in Portugal is that we have these two entities which engage in the compilation of macroeconomic statistics. In the Central Bank of Portugal, so as I explained, we are responsible for the compilation of external statistics, and we have a compilation system that which has several phases, which are similar, I think, in many statistical compilation systems. So we have the data acquisition, the compilation process, including data analysis, and then statistical dissemination. I'm not going into much detail on this, just to highlight that in terms of data sources, or in the data acquisition phase, we rely strongly on direct reporting by corporations in our country, and also on settlements data from banks. And the statistical dissemination part, we have some information that is supplied to internal users in the bank, and also to the public in general. So going to the description and to more detail of our data source and methods, in terms of data sources, we put this simplified chart to show that the data sources that we use are quite different when we look into the travel component of the services and the rest of the services trade. In terms of travel, we use mostly information coming from payment systems department of our bank, of the Central Bank of Portugal, but also information that is provided by the MSI. While in the other services component, we use mostly information that is reported by corporations resident in Portugal, which is something that we call the COP data, which means the communication of operations with the external entity. And so to describe a bit what are these main data sources that we use in our compilation system, we have two important reports that we receive in the bank coming from external entities of the bank. One is, these are Portuguese acronyms. COL means the communication that the banks made of settlements that are made on behalf of their customers, and this is made on a monthly basis, and this identifies entities and amounts that are paid through the financial system to non-residents. And the other big report that we receive from outside the bank is called COP, which are external operations and stocks that are reported by collective entities in Portugal, and they report these operations also on a monthly basis, and in this case with a statistical classification of their operations. The two reports are linked, so if the call data is sent to the entities that should report the COP operations. but we will see this in more detail later. So just to know more or less the size of these reports, we have around every month 19,000 entities reporting, and this represents a very big amount for our economies, about more than 100% of the GDP, and we make a validation of 84% of these operations in our division. And so this process, as you can see, with the amount of entities that report to us, is quite a heavy burden on us, and this has a very tight schedule between the moment in which we receive the first report. The first settlement reports are received 5 business days after the end of the month, and this report is then sent to is made available to the entities that are identified in the call report as having made settlements with non-residents, and then about 10 days after, 10 to 15 days after the end of the previous of the month, we received the COP report, so these 19,000 reports from entities that are involved in operations with non-residents. And then we have about 9 days to make quality control procedures on this, and then we use the information to our compilation, statistical compilation. And so this is the main data source that we use, as we saw, for the compilation of services besides travel. In the case of travel, the main data source, as I said, is payments data. This information consists of a very rich database that we receive from our payments department, and this has information on the use of debit and credit cards, and with the 2 lines of analysis. First, payments made outside of Portugal by cards using cards issued in Portugal, in Portuguese banks, and on the other way around, we also use payments made in Portugal by foreign issued cards. So in the first part, we want to have information, let's say, on imports, and in the other case, on exports. In the case of travel, we use 2 sides of this information. We use information on cash withdrawals made abroad by Portuguese issued cards, or made in Portugal by foreign issued cards, and this is used directly on production, assuming that this is used to make expenditure by non-residents abroad. And also we use information on card purchases, in this case not directly, because we made some adjustments on the information that we receive by excluding certain transactions, and then we use this information to calculate year-on-year rates of gross rates that are then applied to anchor data that in this case dates from 2016, and it's information that is supplied to us by the Statistical Office on the International Tourism Survey. In addition, we use also payments data on card purchases to estimate the acquisition by resident in Portugal of air travel supplied by non-resident airlines, and this is used to estimate imports of.
Sorry, Sérgio.
Yes. Yes.
Only 1 minute, please.
Okay. So just quickly making just a reference to that we received also information from the Statistical Office on travel and other services. In particular, in the case of travel, of overnight stays of non-residents and revenues in hotels, and also from 2 other services, the information on phishing, and also on the information that we need to calculate processing and CFOB margin. And so just to conclude that looking ahead, what we are working now is on improving our system always, and the first step or the first issue is to improve the quality control procedures. That, as I said, is quite a heavy work that we have, and we want to make this more efficient without losing quality. And then we have also some issues that we would like to improve in terms of the use of payments data, in terms of the consistency of this information with the international guidelines. And finally, we are working also on new presentations of services trade, namely regarding the enterprise characteristics and the modes of supply. We are working on this to make first submission of data in 2024. And that's it. I thank you, and I'm sorry for taking more than I was supposed to take, but I thank you for your attention, and I'm available. Questions either today or if you want to drop me an email, please feel free to do it.
Muchas gracias, Sergio. Te agradecemos mucho la presentación tan interesante. Bien, pues,
thank you for such an interesting presentation. With no further ado, we'll go now with Paul Farello. He is the Associate Director of International Economy at the Bureau of Economic Analysis. He is supervising economic official statistical publication regarding international trade and payment balances and international investment and the opportunities of international companies. And well, therefore, Paul Farello, the floor is all yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Arturo, and hello, everyone. Happy to have this opportunity to contribute to this webinar on international trade and services statistics today. With this presentation, I'll highlight some trends in U.S. trade and services, provide information on the trade and services statistics the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, or BEA for short, publishes, and the data sources underlying them. And I'll finish with some visual representations of selected statistics. The U.S. has had an annual surplus or annual surpluses on trade and services and deficits on trade and goods since the 1970s, with the overall trade deficit widening over the period, as you can see here. The surplus on services has increased from $45 billion in 2003 to $245 billion in 2021, with financial services, other business services, and charges for the use of intellectual property leading the increases, or largest contributors to the increases over that time. The U.S. surplus on services peaked at $300 billion in 2018 before decreasing slightly in 2019 and then more in 2020 and 2021, partially reflecting the impact of the COVID pandemic. In 2021, U.S. exports of services were $795.3 billion and imports of services were $550 billion, resulting in the $245 billion surplus. BEA publishes three major data products that include trade and services statistics. First is a monthly release on U.S. international trade in goods and services that we issue jointly with the U.S. Census Bureau. Census Bureau is responsible for merchandise trade statistics, while BEA is responsible for trade and services, as well as the balance of payments basis trading goods. We include monthly statistics on 11 categories of services monthly, but no country detail in this release. However, once a quarter, we update quarterly seasonally adjusted time series for both goods and services with major trading partners. Second, our quarterly release of the U.S. international transactions accounts, which is how we refer to the balance of payments accounts, includes more detail than the monthly release by both product and by geography. And I've listed the accounts there in parentheses. And third, each July we publish our most detailed set of services statistics by category and geography, along with statistics on services provided by foreign affiliates of multinational enterprises, or M&Es, to their host countries and to third countries. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in this presentation. In addition to the three major data products, BEA publishes these additional dimensions of services statistics either as part of one of the major product releases or as standalone products. I'll provide some examples of the first three data sets listed here after a brief overview of the data sources underlying our services statistics. And as you can see here, for the GATS modes of supply, we have been conducting some research and have some experimental estimates that we have published in a working paper. Okay, we use data from several different sources to produce our published statistics. Our primary source is surveys of businesses located in the United States, which BEA administers. We also use administrative data from other US government agencies and partner country data. For partner country data, for example, we've used data provided to us by colleagues in Mexico and Canada for US exports and imports of travel services since the US stopped conducting border surveys decades ago. So many thanks to our colleagues in Mexico and Canada for this ongoing cooperation. We'll focus a little bit on BEA's services surveys. We conduct, BEA's services surveys. This slide and the next will provide some basic information about our survey program. Since the 1980s, BEA is legally mandated to collect information from US businesses on trade and services and legally required to publish statistics in a manner that does not allow responses from individual businesses to be identified. The survey responses can only be used for statistical and analytical purposes. Our surveys are enterprise surveys, and we use 4 different survey groups, those listed here. The first 3 are filed by US businesses operating in the sector shown, and the 4th is used to capture all other types of business services and intellectual property transactions. We collect transaction values by type of service, by partner country, and by affiliation. That is, whether the transactions are between entities that have a direct investment relationship or between unaffiliated entities. We also ask respondents to identify their primary industry. Benchmark surveys are conducted for financial services, insurance services, and transactions in selected services and intellectual property. These benchmark surveys are conducted every 5 years and are intended to capture the universe or census of reporters in the covered transactions categories. All businesses engaged in international trade and services transactions of $1,000 or greater annually are required to file, even if they are not contacted by BEA. Businesses without annual transactions, businesses with annual transactions below certain dollar values can file aggregate data without breaking it down by partner country and affiliation type. Quarterly and annual sample surveys are similar in content to the benchmark surveys. They are filed by businesses whose annual transactions in dollar terms exceed established thresholds, ensuring that the trade activity of the largest and most impactful transactors are captured. We then estimate transactions for companies not required to file using prior benchmark reporting for those companies and trends in the data that are reported. The next several slides highlight developments in US trade and services in 2020 and 2021. This slide shows exports and imports by major service category. The blue bars reflect transaction values for 2020 and the orange bars reflect values for 2021. The white circles to the right of the vertical white line reflect surpluses, and those to the left of the line reflect deficits in those particular categories. In 2021, seven of the 11 major service categories recorded surpluses, while the remaining 4 recorded deficits. Surpluses were largest in financial services, in other business services, and in charges for the use of intellectual property. And the largest deficits were in transport and insurance services. This chart ranks the top 10 trading partners based on total trade and services. That is exports plus imports. In 2021, the United Kingdom remained the largest trading partner of the United States based on total trade. It was the largest source for US imports and the second largest market for US exports after Ireland. Mexico ranked 9th in 2021. Exports to Mexico were led by travel, other business services, and charges for the use of intellectual property, while imports from Mexico were led by travel, transport, and other business services. This chart shows exports and imports of the total services by affiliation type. The full bars on the left reflect total exports, and those on the right reflect total imports. The blue portions reflect unaffiliated trade, while the remainder of each bar reflects affiliated trade, with the orange portion reflecting US parents, multinationals with their foreign affiliates, and the lighter shaded portion reflecting US affiliates trade with their foreign parents and parent groups. Affiliated trade accounted for 41% of US services exports and 33% of US services imports in 2021. To shed light on the digital economy, in 2014, BEA began publishing statistics on trade in information and communication technology, or ICT services, and trade in potentially ICT-enabled services, following an approach recommended by UNCTAD. A few definitions here. ICT services refers to services that facilitate information processing and communication. ICT-enabled services refer to services delivered over ICT networks. BEA is not yet able to precisely identify services trade that is ICT-enabled because of BEA data that we collect on trade and services by type of service, or we collect data on by type of service, but not on the mode of delivery. Although we do have some schedules in our surveys that we are getting at the mode 1 delivery. So without that specific information, we measure a related but more broadly defined concept of potentially ICT-enabled services, which includes services that can be predominantly delivered remotely over ICT networks. And in this chart, the full bars reflect total exports and imports of services in 2020, and the 2021. The blue portions taken together reflect potentially ICT-enabled services, with the darker blue reflecting the ICT services themselves. And the orange portions reflect services that are not potentially ICT-enabled, such as most travel services, for example. In 2021, US trade in ICT services resulted in a surplus of $38.3 billion, and trade in potentially ICT-enabled services was much greater at $262.3 billion. BEA is currently researching ways to publish more information on digital trade, following guidance from WTO and OECD handbook on measuring digital trade. This chart shows this digital dimension of trade and services by type of service. In 2021, 4 of the 6 major categories of potentially ICT-enabled services recorded surpluses, with the largest surplus occurring in financial services. This chart shows the digital dimension by partner country. In 2021, Ireland maintained its position as the top recipient country for US exports of potentially ICT-enabled services for the 3rd year in a row. The United Kingdom was the top source of imports of potentially ICT-enabled services, and also the top in terms of total trade. And the last chart on this digital dimension shows trade by affiliation type. Affiliated trade accounted for 53% of exports and 50% of imports of potentially ICT-enabled services in 2021. These shares are much higher than the affiliated shares of total services exports at 41% and imports of 33% that I mentioned earlier. This highlights the importance of providing services over ICT networks for intra-firm trade, intra-firm. And in the next few slides, I'll shift the focus to 2 of the other dimensions I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. The first is trade and services compared with services supplied through affiliates. The values shown in this slide show both US international trade, that is GATS modes 1, 2, and 4, if we think back to Barbara's presentation at the beginning, in services, and then services supplied by majority-owned U.S. and foreign affiliates of multinational enterprises. It could be thought of as GATS Mode 3 of commercial presence plus transactions from those countries to third countries. The blue bars on the left reflect total services supplied by US-based firms to foreign persons. The darker blue segments reflect services supplied by foreign affiliates of US M&Es to the host country and to third countries. And then the lighter blue segments reflect US exports of services, and we make an adjustment to exclude exports by majority-owned US affiliates of foreign M&Es to maintain this delivery by the M&Es by the ownership dimension. And then the orange bars on the right are the flip side. They reflect total services supplied to US persons by foreign-based firms. The darker orange segments reflect services supplied by US affiliates of foreign M&Es to markets in the United States, and the lighter orange segments reflect US imports of services excluding US imports from majority-owned foreign affiliates of US M&Es. This comparison confirms the importance of physical proximity to customers in delivery of certain types of services, and that many M&Es serve foreign markets partly or wholly through their affiliates located in or close to the markets they serve rather than through trade. With the final two slides, I'll focus on statistics we publish periodically in a report that profiles US exporters and importers of services, BEA's version of services trade by enterprise characteristics. The analysis presented in this profile report is focused on a subset of statistics on international trade and services that is based on data collected on BEA's services surveys. The statistics cover financial services, insurance services, charges for the use of intellectual property, telecommunications, computer and information services, and other business services. Data from these surveys have been linked to BEA's extensive information on multinational enterprises collected on its activities of multinational enterprise surveys, or AM&E surveys, of US parents and US affiliates, which allow us to learn more about the characteristics of US services traders. The report provides information on firms that trade in selected services by industry, by affiliation type, by firm type, by partner country, and by employment size class. This table on US trade and selected services by major industry by type of service provides an example from the profile report. In 2017, finance and insurance firms had the largest share of selected services, exports and imports, followed by firms in manufacturing and in information. And since 2008, the first year covered by the linked data highlighted in this report, the ranking of the 9 major industry categories presented in this profile report has been nearly unchanged for both exports and imports. And BEA is researching ways to expand its services by industry detail to cover all trade and services categories it publishes. In closing, I'd like to congratulate the colleagues in Mexico and thanks again for this opportunity to participate. Thank you, Arturo.
Muchas gracias, Paul. Gracias por participar.
We thank you, Paul, for this very interesting presentation. Well, we go now to the last presentation of our seminar, which will be given by Araceli Martinez Gama. She is responsible as the General Deputy Director of Economic Surveys for the past 5 years. She is responsible of the economic surveys of the country or the institute that nourish basically the national account system. And she is responsible of the survey of international service trading that we just concluded. And as it was mentioned by Graciela Marquez, the president of INEGI, we shared this information in September, and it is one of the main goals of the seminar, of which to share in regards to our exercises related with the international trading and services. Thank you, Arturo. Good morning, good afternoon. Well, let me share with you the results of the survey on international trade and services, ECIS, in Mexico. This is divided in 4 sections. It is an introduction, the methodology of the survey, the main outcomes, and the steps to be followed. So, well, we have been talking already with other colleagues in this seminar of the relevance of international trade in services is all about. And well, in the case of Mexico, we have conducted this survey in which we will be detailing the methodological areas and the following steps as I have already brought to your attention. Here, let me share with you that these outcomes of the survey that we have conducted will be considered as an experimental statistical exercise. It is our first version of the survey ever conducted in 2021, where we collected information of 2 years, 2019 and 2020. We know that 2020 is an atypical period due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So therefore, it is necessary reviewing a longer time series to analyze the transactions, behavior, and trends of the components of the ITS. So the initial project of INEGI is trying to consider more elements with this survey, so the project will mature, and by doing this, we may transit to a statistical consolidation. So the objective of this survey that took place in 2021 is to generate statistical basic information on enterprises that carry out services transactions abroad in order to contribute to the measurement of international trade in services and to solidify the macroeconomic calculations, as well as to support the design, implementation, and evaluation of public policies on this matter. The methodological areas of this survey have to do with this importance. We will be talking about methodological areas in which precisely we are focusing in the manual on statistics of international trade in services 2010, also the balance of payments and international investment position manual 6th edition 2009, and the extended balance payment services classification of 2010. Here we may see the different types of services. The ones that are highlighted here in block letters are those points that we're not touching within our survey, and we are considering later on to see the particular areas of the 7 of our services that will be considered within our survey. The population, the target population, is all of those companies in the country that are a part of the major economic sectors. So we're considering industrial sector and non-financial services and the wholesale and retail services that were submitted to the questionnaire. But apart from this, of the information of the economic census of 2019 that were reported with international services transactions and or that are related to foreign enterprises and or having operations with enterprises abroad. From here, we are creating the target population, and the coverage of the survey is for the years 2019 and 2020, as I have already mentioned. And this has to do with results at the national level. And the topics are the manufacturing services of physical inputs owned by others, maintenance and repair services, transport, charges for use of intellectual property, telecommunications, computer and information services, other services, and personal, cultural, and recreational services. Now, the scope of the survey is that we will be able to generate outcomes regarding the company size for the SMEs and also for the sector of industry, trade, and non-financial private services. And we will also have information for the partnering country with which Mexico is carrying out its transactions and the way of supply, focusing in the supply modes 1, 2, and 4, cross-border supply, digital supply, consumption abroad, or presence of natural persons. Along this line, we will talk about how we create the sampling framework of this survey that comes from the Statistical Business Register in Mexico based on the Economic Census 2019. And here we have 4.971 million companies. We get our sampling framework for the survey of international trading services that provided 9,796 enterprises.
Ingresos o gastos de bienes y servicios en el extranjero. También se aplicaron en los censos económicos unas preguntas cualitativas que si la empresa...
Qualitative questions are there. If the group belongs to a holding group, a financial group of controlling companies, or if it's a company with foreign investment, or those companies with economic units located abroad. That's how the framework was created, made up by 9,726. These are the results of the survey. In the following slide, you can see that in 2019 and 2020, 51.9% of the framework, 5,086 companies claim that they performed trade operations, 51.8%, 5,070 businesses. For these universes, we will create outcomes that can be observed depending on the company size. Over 50%, speaking of major companies, 56.7% in 2019 involved in trading services, in 2020, 55.9%, and middle-sized companies with a similar percentage, around 53% in the 2 years between 45 and 46 years, and micro companies to a lesser percentage. Speaking of the universe made up by 9,500 companies. If we move on to the next one, we will see the estimation of the expenditures for 2022. $41,513 million for 2019 and 2020, $35 billion. The expenses, it's a lesser amount, as we've seen in the country, $15 billion and $11 billion for expenses. If we make a comparison with the information, if we compare it to other relevant items such as oil imports or income made up by foreign visitors to Mexico, we can see that in income, crude oil imports accounted for 55.2% of the total amount of ECIS for 2019, and for 2020, 41 0.5%. This, with regard to crude oil exports, for international visitors, 60.7 for 2019 and 30.7%. The share of income made up by visitors regarding the profit from the survey. And if we go to the expenditures, we can compare the expenses of Mexican travelers abroad accounts for 65.8% in ECIS for 2019 and 31.4% for 2020. If we take a look at imports of agricultural products, it's 88% for participation in 2019, and it went down in 2020. For 2020, these expenditures of exports are increased. Natural gas imports now, with the next item to compare, includes gas with 41.9 for 2019 and 43.7% for 2020. Hence, we can see that in this comparison, the data collected in the trade and services survey. Now let's move on according to services type. 2019 and 2020, it's around 80% of manufacturing services, 79.6 in 2019, 81.1 in 2020. And transportation services, 7.8% 2019, 7.7 2020. And a major share, although 9.2 less than 10%, but we see other business services reflected there in 2019, moving on to 2020 with 7.3%. If you pay attention to the expenses in the pie chart, we can see that 1/3 accounts for the first of the manufacturing services that are property of others, 36.9 in 2020, 27.1%. Other business services gain relevance with 25.1% 2020, and charges for intellectual property use with 22.5% in 2020. If we use the information provided by the survey around the partner companies, we see that our main partner is the United States, above 70%, 74.9 in 2019 and 77 in 2020, followed by the European Union with 9% in 2020, Switzerland, Canada, China, and others that account for the rest of the countries. The partner countries for expense-wise, our main partner continues to be the US in 2025, 51.1%, followed by the EU with a 17.3% level, Japan and South Korea too, as well as the rest of the countries there and others. And now let's take a look at the supply modality of income, because it involves moving merchandise, which is the first share of income with 80% and 81.7% in 2020, And the supply module, cross-border model and digital means 17%. And module 4, staff delivery 2.7. And in expenses for the supply. This is one of this presentation's last slides. And we can see the main supply mode is digital means with 59.2% of the expenses in 2020, followed by movement of merchandise 29.7 for 2020 and reception of personnel. This is part of the survey's main outcomes. Now, what are the next steps? To be consistent about this survey, that it is conducted regularly, that we also resort to international consultants and provide information over digital media, reinforce calculations within the national accounts system, and contribute to global value chains. The survey outcomes are here in the link on the slide, where you can see the breakdown of the results shared. This is my last slide. Actuarian Arturo Blancas is the General Director of Economic Statistics. Gerardo Duran and Francisco Guillen and me are working to continue with such an important mission. Thank you very much. Thank you, Araceli, for your presentation. It's interesting. It involves what we're doing at INEGI Mexico to provide with useful input to users so they can analyze such a significant way of providing services abroad. This was the last presentation of this seminar. And we do have time for a Q&A before we close. A question: are business services going to be measured in Mexico? Well, Mode 3 is part of the working method. The other modes are currently being studied: 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, and 12. We're currently figuring out what to do because there are more sources of information. There are more data sources. Araceli already mentioned those we are measuring and observing in the survey. Edmundo Berumen wonders, Araceli, if you can answer this. How do you compare the sample size of companies in Mexico vis-a-vis other countries? Do you have specific data? The sample size can be very relevant for other countries' surveys. It really depends on the framework being defined and the type of sampling scheme. Mexico defines sampling based upon the traits I mentioned, mainly those businesses that had foreign share in according to the survey, as well as other foreign investments, as well as other relations with the rest of the world, some type of foreign relation. So it may be relative regarding the sample size. At ECIS, the sample size is above 5,000 economic units in a framework of 9,400. So the sample is above 50%, the predefined framework for Mexico. This is a robust sample. It's a strong and large sample size. And to find out the sample sizes in other countries, we need to resort to these types of mechanisms. Thank you, Araceli. Are there more questions from the audience? Please raise your hand. Carmen, please. Thank you. We're working for the Pacific Alliance at ECLAC. The information provided by the Mexican Ministry of Economics is that you don't measure other business services in terms of professional services and technical services, according to the version 6 of BPM 6. So please, can you clarify that? Now that you have the outcomes of the survey, now that you have the results, because I don't understand the explanations. And another question is that I think that your progress is being made in supply modes 1, 2, 4, but mode 3 is still missing. That's what I was talking about. Thank you.
¿Alguna respuesta, Araceli?
Araceli?
Sí, con respecto a lo que
Well,
es el modo de suministro
about supply mode 3, you're right. It's not being measured because it's actually the relation
en mexicanas con sus filiales
between Mexican companies and their subsidiaries or foreign companies with subsidiaries in Mexico. We need to explore that further. At present, it's those sales or transactions with their own subsidiaries. This is why we're not taking into account Spain. In Spain, 6 is not considered internationally due to those transactions. However, we will continue to explore. We're already working to study multinational companies. And we will have more information about business services, business-related services. There is a breakdown of research, R&D, and other services are part of the survey in that under that classification. Thank you. Yes, my answer was really about the components, but now Araceli just answered the rest. Thank you. Any other comments, remarks, questions? Well then, we have come to an end. We went a bit further. We went a bit longer. But still, thank you very much for joining us. We did have around 195 people in the audience, so thank you very much for your interest. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, United Nations, Antonella, Markie, Sérgio, Paul, Araceli. Thank you so much for your support during this seminar. We can now better understand this topic. As you have all mentioned, this is a relatively new topic. It's super important and it gains strength, drive, and statistics institutes need to deal with the situation. There are different exercises, different lines to address, lots of work to do. We're just getting started, and we're here at your service in case you have further questions, or if you can assist us with references, we're open. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. We send greetings from the INEGI president. She says thank you very much. Bye.